Next chapter. Why do we collect federal taxes? So when I give this lesson one-on-one to people, before I begin, I ask them, why are federal taxes collected and what are they used for? And the answer that they almost always give me is that they pay for things. They give us Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They pay for the military. They pay too much for the military. They pay for federal employees' salaries, FBI and Social Security employees and the politicians and the president. They help us fix our bridges and give us infrastructure and fix our roads. But we now know that this is not true. So why do we collect federal taxes? There are three major reasons that I'm going to talk about today. First, the purpose, and then two important uses. Excuse me while I get a drink. The purpose of collecting federal taxes is to drive the currency and drive the economy. And to almost all the people that I speak to, they have no clue what that means. When I first heard it, I had no clue what that means. And how could we? Because we've never been taught this. But before we go into what that means, I want to talk about the purpose of a government. The purpose of a government is to compel the people to use the real resources at its disposal for the benefit of society. And money, the US dollar, is the incentive that the government gives to the people for doing so. Money is a less violent form of coercion than a gun to the head or threats. So some of that money is taxed back, but the rest of it, the people get to do whatever they want with. There are no strings attached. It is an interest-free grant. So when Britain went into the countries that they tried to colonialize, how did they get those people to use the British pound? When the United States began, how did they get the people in the 13 colonies to use the dollar? And how they did it, because they were perfectly happy using the British pound at the time. And what they said to the people was, you will pay taxes, and you will pay them only in our currency. Because if you don't, you will face severe consequences. Penalties, confiscation, jail. Severe penalties for not paying federal taxes. That is what forces the people to care about the money. That is what forces the people to find a job so they can get more of that money because they have to pay federal taxes in that money. The federal government, however, only cares about its real resources and productive capacity. So I have heard a number of times the US dollar has value, people say, because people have faith in the US government. But what that is more accurately stated as is that the US dollar has value because people have faith that the US government will do something really severe if you don't pay your federal taxes with the US dollar. Critical use one. So that is driving the currency and driving the economy. Now we're going to go into critical use one, controlling demand. So at the end of the Depression through World War II, the United States only went off of the gold standard. In 1971, a whole bunch of countries did. During World War II, car manufacturers stopped making new cars and they used all of their real resources, steel, rubber, plastic, paint, so on. Instead of making new cars, they made tanks and boats and planes and artillery. No new cars were produced during the war. However, roughly speaking, demand for new cars was about the same. Before we move on, we need to define inflation because it is often misused. The term is often misused. Inflation is not when the price of bread goes up. Inflation is not when the price of gas goes up. Inflation is not when the price of everything in an entire industry goes up. Inflation is when the price of everything Everything available for sale in the US dollar goes up and continues to go up. It is a macroeconomic phenomenon. Inflation is a big deal. So we had a lot of new people that wanted new cars, and we had no new cars to offer them. We must make these roughly equal, or we're going to have a big problem. The only two solutions are to either increase supply or decrease demand, or some combination of the two. In this situation, however, increasing supply is simply not an option. We have decided that fighting the war is the only thing that matters. So therefore, we must decrease demand. So how do we do that? We can compel the people, we can force them, or we can entice them to stop buying new cars. What are some examples of compelling them using a stick instead of a carrot? We could raise taxes, we could make new laws or regulations, and we can threaten them. That's not what happened. We used a carrot. We tried to entice them to stop buying new cars. What is more appealing than a new car? So people use their money for that instead. And during the war, the answer is patriotism. The government offered the people war bonds. They were marketed as support the troops, support the war effort, but as we now know, they didn't pay for anything. They didn't actually pay for things, even though it was very strongly implied that they do. So here's an example war bond or bond. 10 years, 3.25% annual interest. So if you purchased one of these war bonds in 1945 for $1,000, in 1955 it would mature and you would get back $1,377. War bonds removed the people's money from the economy and reduced demand for new cars, avoiding this big problem. So bonds are very similar to taxes. Both remove money from the economy. Bonds are voluntary, taxes are compulsory. Bonds have a specific length of time that the money leaves the economy. Taxes do not. They leave the money for taxes leaves the economy for infinite length. They never come back. And bonds offer a bonus of interest. But there is one crucial difference between bonds and taxes. Both bonds and taxes remove money from the economy. But when you pay $1,000 in your taxes, you write $1,000, your name on a tax return, you mail it into the federal government. The federal government puts that tax return into a folder in a filing cabinet or on a folder on a computer, and they go through your bank. They go through your bank into your bank account and lower your bank balance by $1,000. Nothing happens on their side. They don't raise anything by $1,000. That money does not move from your bank account to the government's bank account. However, they have your tax return and they know, they've notated on your tax return how much you've paid. They know how much you've paid and when you've paid it, but they don't have that money. It simply disappears from you. So when Congress writes a number into a bill and it's signed into law by the president and through the budgetary process, money is born. On the other side, the opposite side of that is when it is taxed back, it dies. And again, I want to emphasize we are only talking about federal level, not state, not local. So taxes are the opposite of money creation. And if you think about it, it has to have an opposite. Otherwise, we're going to accumulate infinite money and lose control very quickly. So taxing is like a child erasing that bill off of a piece of construction paper. It is like ticking down the score on a scoreboard to 0. The money disappears because we want it to disappear. Critical use number 2 for federal taxes. And it's called imposing moral decisions. Some of the following examples are more applicable to state and local. However, the concepts are exactly the same. So we could increase taxes to we could increase taxes to discourage behavior by making it more expensive. We could decrease taxes to encourage behavior by making it less expensive. Examples of increasing taxes to discourage behavior. We could discourage use of vices, alcohol, gambling, smoking, drugs. We could discourage activities that cause pollution and climate change by raising taxes on those activities. We could decide how much do we want to raise taxes? How much do we want to discourage it? Do we want to stop it, or do we want to just slow it down and raise it a little bit? We could also decrease taxes to encourage behavior. We could decrease taxes on gym memberships. We could decrease taxes on activities that prevent pollution and climate change, such as solar panels and electric cars. And there's one more example of discouraging behavior going back with raised taxes. And that is to increase taxes on the super wealthy to discourage immoral levels of income inequality. For example, we as a society could decide on 3 thresholds, and we as a society could decide on the specific numbers for those thresholds. And let's say that this is what we came up with. The top threshold is $1 billion. Everything above that, if you have $1 billion or more. And we say that the consequence of this is that if you have that much money, you can buy politicians and you can create the laws in your favor, and that is simply unacceptable. And we decide that that is called obscene wealth. And we're going to tax almost all of it. However, we are only going to tax the portion above $1 billion, not below it. We are only talking about the obscene portion. Threshold number 2, below that, 500 million to a billion. And this threshold is not quite as obscene. However, it is really difficult to become even more wealthy unless you harm other people in the process by extracting off of their well-being. So we decide that this is simply too rich. It's not obscene, but it is too rich, and we're going to tax a lot of it. And finally, $0 to $500 million. If you have that much money, enjoy it. That's the American dream. It's reasonable. So we're going to tax a modest amount of it, but you can basically keep it and enjoy it. An important aside. MMT is knowledge. MMT does not say whether or not we should tax the rich. It also does not say how much we should tax the rich by. I, as a progressive, however, take the knowledge of MMT and say, yes, we must tax the rich. Our corrupt politicians take the knowledge of MMT and choose to give tax breaks to the millionaires. They use the knowledge of MMT to help the rich. They don't want to help the people, or they don't help the people. We can choose to do with that knowledge or not do with that knowledge whatever we feel is right. You don't blame medicine or choose not to learn medicine because Nazis took that knowledge and chose to conduct horrible experiments. What you should do is learn MMT and cure people. Medicine. You should learn medicine and cure people. You don't blame MMT or choose not to learn MMT because our corrupt politicians choose to take that knowledge and help rich people instead of the people. You should learn MMT and help the people. And besides, you can't fight the cheaters if you don't know the rules. So I, as a progressive, say, yes, we must tax the rich. We must tax the rich to reduce their power, which would therefore increase our power. We must tax the wealthy because it is moral and just and equitable and right. We cannot and should not tax the rich because we need their money. Yet that is all we ever hear. Not only shouldn't we tax the rich to get their money, it is impossible to tax the rich to get their money. Yet this is all we ever hear. I, as a progressive, also say that we should reduce the military, not MMT. I do. Because we are the bullies of the world. The military is supposed to protect the people. We must reduce the military because it is moral and just and right. We should not and cannot reduce the military in order to get that money so we can have health care or education. All federal programs are funded by created money. And these are numbers that were written into bills that are already on the books. Money is created for federal programs whenever it is needed every single time. Whenever a Social Security benefit is paid out, the currency is created. Whenever Medicare benefits and all other benefits, federal benefits are paid out, currency is created. Whenever federal employees, their salaries are paid, currency is created. Same with military funding. Federal employees examples, for FBI, military, judges, congressmen.